There's a powerful moment in therapy that almost every successful person encounters. It's when you realize that the colleague who drives you crazy with this constant need for validation is actually reflecting something you've buried deep within yourself. Carl Jung observed that the traits we most despise in others are often the exact qualities we've exiled from our own consciousness. It's not just psychology. It's a pattern that shows up in boardrooms, relationships, and every major decision you make. What's fascinating is this. The parts of yourself you've worked hardest to eliminate might actually be the key to your next level of growth. Not in the way self-help gurus preach about positive thinking, but through a deeper, more authentic form of integration that Jung discovered. His concept of the shadow self is the real psychological mechanism that's influencing your career, your relationships, and your sense of self, whether you're aware of it or not. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the most successful leaders and innovators credit their achievements not to eliminating their shadows, but to understanding and integrating them. If you've spent any time in a corporate environment, you've probably sat through your share of personality assessments. Myers-Briggs, DISC, Enneagram. They all claim to capture your essence in a neat little package, but Jung understood something far more profound. The most powerful parts of your personality are the ones that didn't make it onto those assessments. Consider the script we're handed from early childhood about what a successful man looks like. We're told to be ambitious but never appear power-hungry, to be confident but show no trace of arrogance, to lead others while keeping any aggression carefully in check, to achieve greatness but remain perfectly humble. It's an impossible paradox, isn't it? Jung recognized this as a form of psychological amputation. Every time we cut off a part of ourselves to fit this mold, it doesn't disappear. It gets banished to what he called the shadow self. It's not your dark side. It's more like your exiled side, the parts of yourself deemed too inappropriate, too aggressive, or too ambitious for polite society. Here's where it gets interesting. Your shadow isn't just sitting idle in your unconscious. It's actively working behind the scenes, influencing every executive decision you make, shaping your leadership style, determining your relationship patterns, and even directing your career trajectory. It's present in every risk you assess and every definition of success you pursue. Many high achievers hit a ceiling not because they lack skills or intelligence, but because they're operating with only half their psychological resources. The other half, their shadow, is running a covert operation in their blind spot, often sabotaging their best efforts at the worst possible moments. As Jung put it, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. In other words, it's not about being good or bad, it's about being whole. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of trying to eliminate these supposedly negative traits, what if you could transform them into assets? Your drive for power could become authentic leadership. That aggressive edge might fuel healthy ambition. What society labels as self-interest could enable you to set better boundaries. Even those darker thoughts could become the spark for creativity and innovation. Think of it this way. The most effective leaders aren't the ones who've eliminated their shadows. They're the ones who've learned to integrate them. They've turned their full psychological inheritance into a source of power, rather than letting half of it operate unchecked in the background. Now this could be something you've already experienced, but might not have named yet. Picture this. You're in a meeting, and a colleague takes credit for someone else's work. The rage you feel in that moment isn't just about professional ethics. It's about something deeper, something more personal. That visceral reaction, that immediate judgment, is often your first clue to your own shadow. When we encounter our shadow traits in others, our reaction isn't measured, it's immediate and intense. Jung called this projection, and it's far more sophisticated than simple psychological defense. Think of it as your psyche's way of showing you what you've hidden from yourself. Consider how Fight Club captured this phenomenon. When Edward Norton's character first meets Tyler Durden, he's both repelled and fascinated. Tyler embodies everything the narrator has repressed: freedom, masculinity, chaos. This isn't just clever filmmaking, it's a perfect illustration of how we often find our shadow traits embodied in those who both repel and intrigue us. In your professional life, these shadow projections have likely been operating unnoticed for years. That CEO you secretly envy and criticize, he might be expressing ambition you've deemed unacceptable in yourself. The colleague whose social ease irritates you, she might represent a natural charisma you've suppressed to maintain your image of serious professionalism. The neuroscience here is fascinating. When we encounter our shadow traits in others, our amygdala, the brain's emotional center, activates before our prefrontal cortex can even process the information. This is why our reactions feel so raw and immediate. It's not logical, it's limbic. But these reactions aren't random. They often cluster around specific archetypal patterns. The power shadow manifests in our reaction to authority. The imposter shadow shows up in our judgments of others' success. And the trickster shadow appears in our criticism of those who don't play by the rules. When you find yourself having an outsized reaction to someone's behavior, try this thought experiment. Imagine their trait as a mirror. What's being reflected back? That arrogant boss you can't stand. Where in your life have you buried your own desire for recognition? That manipulative colleague. When have you denied your own strategic intelligence because it felt too Machiavellian? These triggers aren't weaknesses. They're windows into your complete self. Every trait you judge harshly in others is often a disowned part of your own psychological makeup. The goal isn't to eliminate these judgments, but to understand them as signposts pointing toward your own wholeness. Listen to this story about Marcus, a senior executive whose experience perfectly illustrates this dynamic. He practiced shadow work after noticing his intense irritation with a peer who could effortlessly work the room at corporate events. Throughout his process, something fascinating emerged. Beneath his judgment lay an uncomfortable truth. Marcus had buried his own natural charisma years ago, believing that to be taken seriously, he had to embody a more rigid, professional persona. It was classic projection. His colleague wasn't doing anything wrong. He was simply expressing what Marcus had denied in himself. Jung captured this phenomenon perfectly when he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But he recognized something even more profound. These irritations aren't random emotional reactions. They're the psyche's intelligent system at work, constantly pushing us toward wholeness. Every time Marcus felt that surge of judgment watching his colleague work the room, his psyche was actually giving him a gift, an invitation to reclaim his disowned charisma. Once he understood this, everything shifted. His irritation became a doorway to rediscovering and integrating that lost aspect of himself, ultimately transforming his leadership style. The key is to move from projection to recognition to integration. When you feel that familiar surge of judgment or criticism, pause. Ask yourself, what's really being activated here? What part of myself am I seeing reflected back? This isn't just psychological theory. It's a practical tool for personal and professional growth. The development of our shadow is a sophisticated adaptation that begins before we can even speak. Imagine the world of a little boy. He falls and hurts himself at the playground. His first instinct is to cry, but he hears those familiar words, "Big boys don't cry." In that moment, something greater happens. A natural emotion gets relegated to the shadow. What's fascinating is how this psychological mechanism evolves. Each time we suppress an authentic impulse, our brain creates a neural pathway of rejection. It's not just about emotions, it's about whole aspects of our personality. The ambitious child labeled as too aggressive. The curious student told he's asking too many questions. The young professional warned about being too intense. Each label, each correction, each subtle disapproval creates another thread in what eventually becomes our shadow. Consider how our cultural narrative of masculinity has shaped this process. 2 generations ago, men were expected to be stoic providers. Our grandfathers buried their emotional lives so deeply that many took them to their graves. Our fathers' generation witnessed the beginning of a shift. They were told they could have feelings, but only certain ones, expressed at certain times, in certain ways. And now, we are caught in a fascinating paradox, expected to be both vulnerable and invulnerable, both strong and sensitive, both ambitious and content. The family system plays a crucial role here. Think about the unspoken rules in your childhood home. Perhaps achievement was the only acceptable form of self-expression. Or maybe anger was allowed, but fear was taboo. Some families permit sadness but condemn rage. Others celebrate intellectual prowess while dismissing emotional intelligence. Each family creates its own unique recipe for shadow development. And it is this pattern that continues into our professional lives. The corporate world, despite its claims of valuing authenticity, often demands a sophisticated form of psychological censorship. The traits that might have helped our ancestors survive, aggression, cunning, territorial behavior, become liabilities in the modern boardroom. Yet they don't disappear. They go underground. Jung observed that our persona, our social mask, develops in direct proportion to our shadow. The more polished and acceptable our outer presentation becomes, the more we tend to deny and suppress its opposite. Think of the impeccably ethical executive who's plagued by fantasies of breaking all the rules, or the dedicated family man who dreams of absolute freedom. These aren't contradictions, they're compensations. What's particularly relevant for our generation is how we're now facing our own shadows while raising children. We might find ourselves automatically telling our son not to cry, even though we consciously reject that old stereotype. Or catch ourselves praising our daughter only for achievement, unconsciously perpetuating the very patterns we're working to overcome. The key insight here isn't that we should have been raised differently. It's understanding that the shadow's development was both necessary and intelligent. It helped us survive, fit in, and succeed according to the metrics we were given. But now, as conscious adults, we have the opportunity to revisit these adaptations. We can ask ourselves, which of these patterns still serve us? Which ones are ready to be transformed? Think of it like software running in the background of your psyche. It was installed for good reasons, but like any program, it needs periodic updates. Some code can be refined, some needs to be rewritten, and some might be ready for complete integration into your conscious operating system. If integration doesn't happen, shadow denial will manifest in ways that most successful people would never connect to their suppressed psyche. Let me paint you a familiar scene. It's 3 a.m., and despite your exhaustion, sleep won't come. Your mind circles through the same patterns, reviewing decisions, replaying conversations, planning countermoves. On the surface, you're living the dream. Executive position, family, respect of your peers. Yet something feels fundamentally off. The exhaustion you feel isn't just physical. When we maintain rigid psychological barriers against our shadow, we're essentially running two separate operating systems simultaneously. One, conscious, curated, and socially acceptable. The other, underground, constantly working to be heard through subtle sabotage, unconscious behaviors, and those moments of inexplicable reactivity. Think of your psyche as a pressure system. Every suppressed impulse, every denied emotion, every aspect of yourself deemed unacceptable creates pressure that must find release. The more sophisticated our defenses become, the more sophisticated our shadow's expression becomes. That passive-aggressive email you sent last week? That's your denied anger finding a socially acceptable disguise. The procrastination on that crucial project? Often that suppressed rebellion speaking through inaction. In relationships, the cost becomes even more apparent. Ever notice how your relationships follow strangely similar patterns? Perhaps you consistently attract partners who express the very traits you've disowned in yourself. The man who prides himself on his rationality repeatedly finds himself entangled with highly emotional partners. The controlled, disciplined achiever keeps encountering chaotic, unpredictable situations. This isn't coincidence, it's compensation. In the corporate world, shadow denial creates an executive paradox. The higher you climb, the more parts of yourself you feel compelled to deny. Yet success at the highest levels actually requires full access to your psychological resources, including those you've banished to the shadow. This creates a fascinating bind. The very traits you've suppressed might be the ones you most need for your next level of achievement. The physical toll is equally real. Chronic shadow suppression correlates with specific health patterns: disrupted sleep, digestive issues, unexplained anxiety. Your body keeps the score, as trauma experts often say. That tension headache during board meetings? It might have more to do with suppressed authentic expression than with your workload. Consider how shadow denial impacts decision-making. When we're cut off from parts of our psyche, we're essentially flying blind. You might pride yourself on being logical and rational, having buried your intuitive side years ago. But what if that suppressed intuition is precisely what you need for strategic insight? What if your denied emotional intelligence is the missing piece in your leadership? The most insidious cost is the drain on your creative energy. Maintaining psychological barriers requires immense energy that could be directed toward innovation, leadership, and authentic connection. It's like trying to drive with one foot constantly on the brake. You can still move forward, but at what cost to your engine? The impact ripples through your closest relationships. With your intimate partner, the shadow often emerges in moments of stress or vulnerability. With your children, it shapes what you unconsciously permit or prohibit in their expression. In professional relationships, it influences who you trust, who you promote, and how you handle power dynamics. But here's what makes this understanding powerful. These costs aren't permanent. Once recognized, they become doorways to extraordinary breakthroughs. Every suppressed trait contains potential energy. Every denied aspect of self holds transformative power. The question isn't whether these traits will express themselves, it's whether that expression will be conscious or unconscious, integrated or fragmented. When people begin serious shadow work, something remarkable occurs. Not the spiritual bypass that's become so popular in corporate wellness programs, but a fundamental shift in how they experience power, purpose, and potential. Let's explore what could happen when you stop fighting your shadow and begin the work of integration. First, consider what becomes available when you release the energy tied up in shadow suppression. Remember that ambitious director in your firm who burns out every quarter? He's using most of his psychological resources maintaining an image of perpetual strength. But when you integrate your shadow, including your supposed weaknesses, you access a different kind of strength, one that doesn't require constant vigilance to maintain. Take the story of a CFO named Michael as an example. Michael had always prided himself on pure rationality, dismissing intuition as unreliable. Through shadow work, he discovered that his suppressed intuitive side wasn't a liability. It was processing complex market patterns his conscious mind couldn't quantify. When he integrated this capacity, his strategic insights became remarkably more nuanced and accurate. In leadership, integrated shadow work creates complete presence. You've likely encountered leaders who command attention not through position or force, but through a kind of authentic gravitas. Often, this comes from someone who's done the work of integration. They don't need to perform authority because they embody it, including both its light and shadow aspects. What's fascinating is how shadow traits transform through integration. Take aggression, a trait many executives believe they need to eliminate. Through integration, raw aggression often transforms into assertive clarity. The power games you've learned to despise in others become sophisticated strategic thinking. That manipulative edge you've denied, it can evolve into emotional intelligence and diplomatic skill. In innovation and creative thinking, shadow integration unleashes potential that most executives never knew they had. The parts of yourself you've labeled as too chaotic, too unconventional, or too challenging often hold the seeds of breakthrough insights. Think of Steve Jobs. His famous reality distortion field was essentially integrated shadow material, transformed into revolutionary vision. The transformation extends into every relationship. When you're no longer projecting your shadow onto others, you see them more clearly. Team dynamics improve because you're not unconsciously reacting to shadow material in your colleagues. Family relationships deepen because you've developed the capacity to handle complexity, both in yourself and others. Shadow integration transforms your relationship with power itself. Most executives oscillate between craving power and feeling guilty about that craving. Integration allows you to hold power with a kind of psychological maturity that's rare in corporate settings. You don't need to apologize for your ambition or disguise your strategic mind. The long-term impact on your legacy is bigger than you can imagine. Leaders who've integrated their shadow tend to build more sustainable organizations. They create cultures that can hold complexity because they themselves have developed that capacity. They mentor others more effectively because they can recognize and work with shadow material in their teams. Jung said that wholeness should be the goal. Through shadow integration, you discover that your supposed liabilities often house your greatest gifts. The traits you've been taught to reject often contain the seeds of your most significant contributions. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully who you already are. The journey isn't about adding another self-improvement protocol to your life. Instead, think of it as archaeological work of the psyche, excavating what's already there, waiting to be acknowledged. If you're ready to move beyond intellectual understanding and turn it into lived experience, here are some powerful methods you could try. Start with the morning shadow dialogue. Before your day begins, or better said, before the world demands your attention, sit with your most recent emotional trigger. Not to solve it, not to improve it, but to truly experience it. That surge of anger when someone challenged your authority, that flash of envy when a peer succeeded, let yourself feel it fully in the safety of solitude. The key here isn't analysis, but honest presence with what emerges. Your relationship with these shadows deserves documentation, not in the structured way you might approach journaling, but through what Jung called active imagination. Write as if you're having a conversation with that part of yourself you've labeled as unacceptable, that competitive drive you've denied, that desire for recognition you've suppressed. Give them a voice. You might be surprised at their wisdom. Dreams offer a direct line to shadow material, but most people approach them too analytically. Instead of interpreting, simply record them with all their contradictions and impossible scenarios. Pay special attention to the dream figures that disturb you most. They often represent your most powerful suppressed energies. Another step you can take is shadow sitting. Find 20 minutes of complete solitude. Take one trait you judge harshly in others, arrogance, manipulation, weakness, whatever triggers you most. Now imagine this trait as a distinct part of your psyche. Don't try to change it. Don't try to make it more acceptable. Just listen to what it wants you to know. This isn't comfortable work, but it's transformative. In your closest relationships, you can practice trigger tracking. When someone provokes an outsized reaction in you, pause. The intensity of your response is usually proportional to the depth of shadow material being touched. Nature provides a powerful context for shadow work. Find a place where you can be completely alone. Wilderness if possible. A park if necessary. Speak aloud the traits you've been denying. Let yourself express the ambitions, fears, or desires you've kept hidden without censorship. The natural world can hold these revelations in a way that human company often cannot. Your body carries shadow material in its tension and movement. Develop somatic awareness through conscious movement, martial arts, weightlifting, running, whatever allows you to feel fully embodied. Notice which movements feel forbidden or inappropriate. These physical restrictions often mirror psychological ones. Consider forms of expression that bypass your analytical mind. Drawing, even if you're not artistic. Playing an instrument, even if you're not musical. These activities can bypass your usual defenses, allowing shadow material to emerge naturally. Create some integration rituals for yourself. These are personal practices that acknowledge both your light and shadow aspects. It might be as simple as a morning acknowledgement of your full self, or as elaborate as a weekly practice of writing letters to your disowned parts. The form matters less than the commitment to regular engagement with your complete psyche. The journey of shadow integration isn't a destination you reach, but a relationship you develop with yourself, with your power, with the full spectrum of your potential. Every time you catch yourself in harsh judgment of others, every moment of inexplicable emotional intensity, every pattern you find yourself repeating. These aren't obstacles to overcome. They're invitations to become more completely yourself. The parts of you that you've worked hardest to eliminate might contain exactly what you need for your next evolution. That aggressive edge you've suppressed could become the assertive clarity your team needs. The ambition you've judged as too much might be the fuel for innovation your organization is missing. Even that manipulative tendency you've denied could transform into the strategic insight that sets you apart. Jung understood something profound about human nature. that our greatest growth doesn't come from adding new qualities, but from reclaiming what we've lost. In the executive suite, in the boardroom, in every high-stake negotiation, the leaders who command genuine respect aren't those who've eliminated their shadows, but those who've learned to integrate them. The work begins with a simple but powerful choice. Will you continue to spend your energy maintaining the walls between your conscious and shadow selves? Or are you ready to engage in the deeper work of integration? The answer to this question could define not just your next career move, but the very legacy you leave behind. Remember, your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the other half of your potential, waiting to be recognized, integrated, and transformed. Will you be conscious and intentional about how your traits express themselves? The path forward isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully who you already are. And in that authentic wholeness lies not just personal power, but the capacity to lead others toward their own integration. This is the real work of leadership, not just managing external resources, but integrating our full psychological inheritance into service of something greater than ourselves.